Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's episode, we'll be running with sand people and speeder bikes in the Book of Boba Fett, and then we'll be screaming hopelessly about the end of the world in Don't Look Up. But before all of that, Nick, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Well, in the last couple of weeks, a couple of musical albums that I've been kind of looking forward to have come out, so I'm going to talk about the fact I've been listening to those. Specifically, I'm talking about FTHC by Frank Turner, an artist who I've followed for a fair while. I mean, he feels like he's an artist I've picked up fairly recently, because I discovered him in my 20s rather than in my teens. But let's be honest, folks, my 20s were a fair while ago now. So yeah, there's the new album FTHC by Frank Turner, and there's the new album Laurel Hell by Mitski, which also came out last week or so. So yeah, I've been listening to both of those quite a lot for the last few days. And yeah, FTHC, the Frank Turner one, is, I guess it's kind of a return to his sort of angry confessional shouting after a few records where he seemed to calm down a bit. I guess it's bad luck for Frank Turner, because even though he maybe sounded a bit calmer and happier in the last few albums, the angry confessional shouting seems to work a lot more for me. It seems to be a space I find it a lot more appealing in. It's just his sort of punky, folky guitar shouting seems to work a lot better when he's, opening an emotional vein rather than trying to make up an intelligent song about an issue or an abstract concept. He did an album called Positive Songs for Negative People. This is quite a while ago now, which was just about the vague concept of coming back and getting better and rising up, and featured very few specifics at all, and that wasn't one of his better ones. To be honest, it's been a few years since the last Frank Turner album that really stuck with me, but I think this one has a lot of potential. It only came out the day before we were recording, so I've listened to it about 3 times, which is, to be honest, quite a lot for a whole record the day after it's released for me. So far, the new Frank Turner album's probably his best one since, I'd say, the early 2010s, when he did his breakup album Tape Deck Heart, which, again, obviously, a bit of a sad one, that. A bit sad and angry. So, yeah, taken him about a decade, but he is once again sad and angry, and I'm quite enjoying it.
Yeah, I always sound a bit like a Frank Turner hipster, because I've not listened to him for quite a long time, but I was quite into him around the time of Sleepers for the Week, which I think is his first album.
That is impressive hipsterism, and also, that's not even that good an album. Come on.
I quite liked it. I liked Sleepers for the Week. I once saw Frank Turner at Preston Student Union supporting the Levellers, which was an amazing bit of being ahead of the curve, because now I think Frank Turner's so popular, I don't think the Levellers could support him. He probably has people more popular than the Levellers as his opening act. So yeah, it's been a long time since I've seriously engaged with his music, but I quite liked there was a couple of albums after that. There was the one that opened with Try This at Home, which was quite good.
Yeah, that was his third one. Yeah, that's a good song. Try This at Home. And then his one after that was England Keep My Bones, which was, I think, his attempt at doing a concept album about England without being weird and nationalist, which is actually quite good. That's actually one of his better records.
Yeah, that was, I think, the point where I stopped engaging with Frank Turner albums. This also, I don't know, he slid out of my rotation of sort of favourite artists. I don't know, he was very political in his early days. Like, famously wrote a song called Thatcher Fucked the Kids, which, that's quite obviously a very straight-up political statement. But I don't know, I got the sense that politics became less crucial to his music, and his sort of political views became a bit woollier. Is his music still political, or has he completely left that behind?
I think he has left it behind a little bit, but there's a couple of songs on the new album which get towards it a bit. I think the current state of politics is one of the things he's angry about. Is it called My Bad? I think there's a song about his time at Eton and how aware he is that the people who he knew when he was at Eton are now fucking up the country.
Yeah, well, I guess that's a good bit of self-awareness. So yeah, I suppose linking back round to the politics. Although, yeah, I always find it strange when I'm reminded that he went to Eton, because, it's not really the sort of place you expect protesting is to cut their teeth.
I think, I don't know, he's always, I think, talked about it as a symptom of his troubled relationship with his father, and that his father basically packed him off to Eton.
Yeah.
Again, there's another angry song about how shit his father was on this album, which also mentions that.
Yeah, that's another recurring theme of his music, yeah.
Well, his father has now transitioned, and apparently they now have a better relationship. One of the cheerier moments on the new album is a sort of redemptive song about that.
Alright, that sounds good.
So yeah, it's an interesting record. There's a sort of a mix between a couple of, happier, more redemptive, but I'm doing a bit better now songs, and quite a lot of sad, angry ones. It's just got a decent bed of emotion behind it. I think he did his sort of vaguely experimental, slightly more electronic album about seeking more compassion in the world, which was okay, and he did his concept album about women in history, which, to be honest, kind of slid off me a bit. But yeah, this is, I think, a decent return to form for old Frank. It's nice to actually really enjoy one of his albums again.
Yeah, I think similar to Spike Lee, I always find that, I guess the Frank Turner stuff's good when he's got something to say and he's angry about it. And even if sometimes, I suppose, the execution, you can poke critical holes in the execution, but, Spike Lee's always his best when he's angry about something and has something to say, and that's what I liked about the early Frank Turner albums.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether the new one would still be a bit soft indie for your taste, but it's, as I say, hard and angry enough for me to get back into. And anyway, yes, aside from Frank Turner, a slightly newer discovery, a genuine last couple of years discovery for me, although not actually a new artist, because she's on like her 5th or 6th album, is Mitski, the American indie singer-songwriter who released her new album Laurel Hell, which I think the title both refers to a kind of thicket, and it's also, I think, a oblique reference to how difficult it's been that her last album was really successful. A sort of oblique reference to resting on your laurels, Laurel Hell, something. One of the things Mitski's very good at is these sort of poetic descriptions. She's got a bit of a reputation as a sort of, I don't know, sad girl singer, I guess, is the cliche, which I know she's actively annoyed by. But yeah, she is very good at a certain kind of existential despair set to weirdly upbeat music.
Yeah, I haven't heard any of Mitski's music, but I've been seeing a lot of buzz about this album on social media and in the press. I read Sarah Manavis's weekly culture newsletter, and she featured this album as a great record in the edition that came out yesterday. So I guess colour me intrigued, is what I shall say.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the poppier Mitski albums. I generally want albums to sit with me a bit longer. Like, I'm not even 100% sure how much I'll still like that Frank Turner record in 2 months, as it only came out yesterday. But the Mitski one, yeah, it's good, and some of the sort of sad synth poppy songs are very good at what they're doing. I suspect the 2 previous albums were slightly better. I'm not actually sure it's her masterpiece, but it is another very good record. I think, yeah, her previous albums were, Puberty 2 and Be the Cowboy, which were both better in different ways, I think. I think Puberty 2 is a bit louder and catchier, and Be the Cowboy is a bit more interesting. But the new one's definitely got some moments. There's some very good, sad bangers on it. There's a song called Love Me More, which is both very sad and very catchy. Similarly, another one called Stay Soft. And there's one called Working for the Knife, which is actually just sad. Very sad. In a sort of existential despair way.
Sounds good. So, to people who have basically just discovering about Mitski now due to all the buzz around this album, do you think this is a good way into her music, or would you recommend starting somewhere else and then working your way around to this album?
Interesting. I think it probably might work quite well as an intro, as a lot of the songs are quite big and catchy. It's either this or Puberty 2, I'd say, would be a good first album to start on. I think those are the most accessible ones. Yeah, Puberty 2 was her 2016 album. It's the album before last. As I say, that was because I got into Mitski probably about 6 to 9 months ago, I think. I think Puberty 2 was the album that really sold it for me. To be honest, I'm still working my way into some of the previous albums. She's done 5, I think. I think there were...
Oh, cool. Well, sounds good. I do want to listen to this, as it has been well received.
Yeah, it does seem to be one of the more anticipated records of the year, though when it came out, it seemed to get a bit steamrolled by that Black Country New Road album, which I haven't listened to as much, because it's not as easy, catchy, and poppy for me to put on in the background. I feel like I'd actually sit down with my headphones and listen properly to Black Country New Road.
Yes, this is an album I have listened to, actually, yes. I really like it. Yeah, Ants from Up There.
Yeah.
Their second album. And yeah, it's got their usual sort of spectral sort of soundscapes of kind of weirdness. They're a big band, 7 members. They bring in everything from violins, guitars, drums, saxophone. These kind of really kind of rich, cryptic, sometimes even Leonard Cohen-esque kind of lyrics that sort of form this very, ethereal portrait. Although then sometimes kind of crystallizing into really, really specific references to Kanye West or holidaying in France. The whole thing is quite bizarre, but it's just sort of beautifully comes together.
Yeah, I have listened to it through a couple of times, Ants from Up There, and there's only a few moments where a certain lyric really jumps out at me or something. It's very nice sort of atmospheric soundscape behind it. So yeah, I probably do need to listen to that a bit more once I've stopped listening to the new Frank Turner album.
Yeah, it's definitely one I think that takes a bit more getting into, but it's really worth it, and I do really, really like their music. I saw them doing a sort of virtual concert during lockdown, and the experience of seeing them live is quite intense. So yeah, I do highly recommend this album if you're looking for something that's unusual but really interesting to listen to.
Yep, so there we go. A rare stop in music reviewing for the MFV boys. Alistair, what else have you consumed in the last fortnight?
So I went to see a film that's getting quite a lot of buzz and a lot of good reviews, which is The Souvenir Part 2. Now, there's really no way to discuss this without spoiling The Souvenir Part 1, also known as The Souvenir. So if you're intrigued by either of these films and want to go into them with as few preconceptions as possible, then skip ahead now. Anyway, there's your warning. Yeah, so The Souvenir Part 1 is set in the early 1980s and follows a woman at film school who starts a relationship with a sort of mysterious man who has a secret, and it turns out that he is a sort of serious heroin user and then dies from an overdose at the end. And this film is kind of picks up the pieces that are left by the first film. It's about the main character trying to piece together her shattered life. after this shocking death and the kind of unraveling of it all and his sort of difficult final days. And it's very much about her, trying to get her life back together, trying to finish this film she's making at film school, which she kind of turns into a sort of tribute to his life. And in a sort of weird metatextual way, the film that she makes at film school becomes the first film in the series, although made into a more sort of trippy, surreal fantasy type film. You kind of get the first film within the second film. And so bits when she's like directing the actors and explaining what she was thinking at different points during scenes that you've seen in the first film play out. So we're in sort of a strange art house territory here. These scenes are kind of staccatic, fragmented sort of like pieces of scenes. So you don't get a lot of like beginning and ends of scenes, just kind of pieces of them. Lots of naturalistic dialogue, very little exposition, very little sort of big moments. But I mean, the whole thing is kind of very rich and very emotionally done. So I would recommend it, even though it's on the weirder end.
Okay, so if it's meta-referencing back to the first one this much, presumably good to see the first one before we see this new one?
Yes, I would recommend seeing the first one first. You might be a bit at sea without seeing The Souvenir if you go to see The Souvenir Part 2. But that said, you probably could figure your way through it. I'd be interested to see someone who went to see The Souvenir Part 2 without seeing The Souvenir Part 1 to see what they made of it. I can imagine what they would say is, that film was a bit light in exposition. Did I miss all the exposition in the first film? To which the answer is no. There is very little exposition. It's just the kind of scenes from a life. So yeah, if you're waiting for the scenes of like how they got together, how they met, why he's a heroin user, that's never revealed. You just have to infer it from the bits you do see.
I mean, I seem to remember a certain podcast co-host suggesting we cover this film on the show, so we nearly got me saying that, I suppose.
Oh yeah, it would be an interesting thought experiment to see how I guess you would have perceived seeing Souvenir Part 2 without Souvenir Part 1. I mean, I hadn't seen The Souvenir Part 1 until recently. I watched on Tuesday night, I watched The Souvenir Part 1 on Amazon at home, and then on Thursday night I went to see The Souvenir Part 2 at the cinema. And I think it did help me understand that I'd seen the first one so recently, because all the bits they're referring back to the first film were very fresh in my mind. So yeah, I guess it'd be interesting to speak to someone who saw the first film when it came out and probably only remembers it in less detail.
When did the first one come out?
It was like 2019, I want to say.
I thought you were going to say it 20 years ago or something.
No, it's the films. They're supposed to sort of set concurrently to each other. In that, yeah, the first film ends with his death. The second film picks up with her living at her mum's house and basically feeling depressed about everything. Yeah, and it's a great film about grief, moving on, and sort of the artistic process. I mean, narratively, it reminds me quite a lot of Fleabag, how the first series or the first installment is very much about lives falling apart. And the second one is about lives being put back together.
Well, yeah, but I guess much as people often seem to want endlessly depressing narratives where everything just gets worse and worse and worse, it's actually kind of shit if you don't get some sort of slight uptick at the end most of the time.
Yeah, I felt this would be quite a depressing and upsetting story if it didn't have this part 2 about things getting better at the end of it.
Yeah, it's true. To vaguely hint at the universe we're about to get into, Return of the Jedi would have been a bit of a bummer if it was actually called And Now Darth Vader Kills Everyone Else.
Yeah, exactly. But I'd recommend The Souvenir Part 2 to anyone looking for interesting or unusual films to see. It's got a great series of kind of cameos and supporting parts. Tilda Swinton plays the main character's mum. I think she's also the actual mum of the actual actress. So we've got a real-life mother-daughter acting duo there. There's also a great appearance from Tosin Cole, who you may remember as Ryan in Doctor Who. He plays one of her friends. And Richard Ayoade has an amazing cameo in the first film and reprises his role and gets several more meaty scenes in the second film, and he's excellent in this.
I hadn't seen Tosin Cole in anything since he was in Doctor Who, so I'm glad he's doing it.
Yeah, I checked out his IMDb page recently, and he seems to be doing quite a lot of stuff. He's in that film Pirates that got very good reviews. Might see at some point, and he's doing stuff. So he's in The Souvenir Part 2, so he's got stuff going on post Doctor Who, which is always nice to see.
Okay, and first up today, it's time to talk about Star Wars The Book of Boba Fett, the latest Disney Plus series set in the Star Wars universe. This, of course, follows Boba Fett after he wanders off at the end of the last season of Mandalorian and decides to become a crime lord on Tatooine. And this follows his attempt to assert himself as the big man in the desert, alongside various flashbacks and returning characters from The Mandalorian and all sorts of stuff going on here. We'll be getting into that in a minute. And this will probably require some level of spoilers, at least in terms of the structure and direction of the story. So if you're a massive Star Wars Boba fan and have not yet seen this, then probably watch it before listening to this review. Okay, anyway, Alistair, what did you think of Boba Fett?
It's an odd show on several levels. I feel like it's searching for its own identity. I kind of felt the big question at the core of this is, why do this instead of another series of The Mandalorian? Because in order for it to be a thing in its own right, kind of its own TV show, which I guess is what it aspires to be, it needs something, to make it different from The Mandalorian. And what makes this different from The Mandalorian? Is it the fact there's less Baby Yoda? There's less Pedro Pascal?
The man's armour is a different colour, Alistair.
Yes, the man's armour is a different colour and he's slightly shorter. Which apparent when they stand next to each other. But yeah, I got the thing that like The Mandalorian was kind of like a space western, which was where we discussed how that's interesting because sci-fi cinema is kind of an offshoot of the western. So kind of that interest in closing the circle was again interesting. But I got the thought they were trying to tell like a gangster story. But there's not a lot of gangstering going on, and they spend a lot of time doing Western things in the desert, such as, train heists and gunslinging. So it's basically looping back to the whole space Western thing. So it doesn't really have its own identity. The crime story wasn't particularly well developed, and we'll probably have to discuss this at length at some point, but I don't think Boba Fett's a particularly great main character. So it wasn't hugely warm to this. But anyway, what did you think of it?
Yeah, as you already hinted at, it's a very oddly structured show in that it seems to consist of two entirely separate kind of strands over the first 6 episodes. There's 4 episodes of Boba Fett, followed by 2 episodes which are basically new episodes of The Mandalorian, in which Boba Fett appears barely at all. He's in one scene and he doesn't speak. And then there's the 7th episode is a sort of dual conclusion crossover finale thing, bringing them both together. And they're so separate from each other, apart from that finale, that you can more or less always review them separately, which is to say that the Boba Fett bit is kind of flat and uninvolving, and the Mandalorian stuff's quite good. I mean, it's a bit overly fan-servicey, but watchable. And then the finale is kind of a mishmash between the two, and it's kind of fine. There's enough action and enough clear goody-baddie plugging away action that you don't really mind the fact that you don't care about a fair few of the characters. Because yeah, that is the big problem with the Boba Fett sections, which I sort of feel like I should focus on because his name's in the title, and he does get slightly more episodes. And yeah, as Alistair says, the problem is mainly that Boba Fett himself is quite uninvolving and his story's quite undeveloped. Like, there's a real sense that they haven't really got under his skin as a character that much, and they don't really develop any of his relationships with other characters that much either. Like, the secondary character in this is Fennec Shand, played by Ming-Na Wen, who is good and has been good in other things. I enjoyed her quite a lot in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but she is given very little to do here. Like, it doesn't help that they keep setting huge chunks of those early episodes in the past to flash back the things that happened to Boba Fett between the Return of the Jedi, where he earned his fan following by falling in a hole, and his later appearance in The Mandalorian. And I don't quite understand any of his decisions, to be honest. It's the baffling amount of time set in the past, giving us interminably long flashbacks, which they could have done in much less time if they needed to do them at all. And as a result, all the current stuff, this gangster thing, as I says, they're sort of trying to do, is just rushed through in a really cursory way. Yeah, they really could have made us care about Boba Fett and Fennec Shand in 4 episodes. That's enough time, but they just walk in circles instead. It's a baffling decision.
Yeah, I wasn't really a fan of this flashback thing, because a lot of it really leads into one of my pet peeves in TV shows especially. It usually happens in TV shows that have too many episodes, when basically there's large flashback bits filling in stuff we already know. I mean, some of it's basically just linking up with bits of previous Mandalorian episodes, which we kind of know because we've seen The Mandalorian, and or just filling in stuff that we kind of knew happened. I mean, there was some interesting bits. It wasn't entirely without merits. Like, you find out more about the Tuscans, the sort of the Sand people who were introduced way back in the first Star Wars movie and sort of play a very minor role in that film. And you kind of find out a bit more about them, and there's an interesting bit of him getting into their culture, but it doesn't really add much to the rest of the plot. It serves, I guess, as some kind of motivation, but that's let down by the fact that you don't really have much character development for Boba Fett. Like, his vague thing is he wants to stop being a bounty hunter and be a boss, but also be a nice crime boss. Somewhat against the what many would feel the kind of essential badassness of the guy in the armour with the guns. The kind of lack of characterization of Boba Fett does let down the fact that when they do like long bits of backstory, it doesn't really like pay off particularly well.
Always frustrating, yeah, when a show spends ages on these flashbacks, which are clearly meant to develop the character, but they just don't really tell you anything. It's a very quiet, silent show, which, not quite silent, but there's not a lot of dialogue, which some might find refreshing compared to the constant pitter patter of a lot of modern genre telly. And, you know, The Mandalorian's not the chattiest of people, and we mostly liked that show. But yeah, in this show, I just came away wishing someone would have a fucking conversation in any of the first 4 episodes, which exposed motivation a bit more deeply than just, I want to be a crime boss.
Yeah, I think this is, I don't know, leaving it a bit too much through the surface. You know, yeah, I think it needed to be a bit more explicit. Yeah, have a bit more character illumination. But yeah, I think possibly one of the flaws of this is the decision to focus in on Boba Fett. Like, he's not as cool as everyone thinks he is, I think, is one of the things that I've left walking away from this. I think that the character Boba Fett he's not on screen particularly much in the original Star Wars films, even though he's kind of cool, but he does a lot of standing around next to Darth Vader in the second film, and a lot of standing around next to Jabba the Hutt in the third film. And he does look kind of badass, but there's not really a lot to his character. I think the infamy of Boba Fett, I think, has been built up through Star Wars sort of extended universe comics, novels, and crucially, I think also video games. There's some great video games with Boba Fett in, especially thinking of the original, like Dark Forces, which is clearly something they're drawing on for The Mandalorian because they've referenced it in that show. But yeah, I think a lot of that also builds up to him being a fan favourite, but as a character to base the whole TV show around, doesn't have a lot of sort of personality to fall back on.
Yeah, a lot of the time they seem to have bringing in other random characters, like there's 2 separate Hutts parading around, not doing that much. And also the character Black Chrysanthemum, the large black Wookiee, who is actually a character from some Star Wars comics written by podcast favourite Kieran Gillen, which were pretty good. And it was a nice Easter egg to see him in there, but again, that is time they could have spent giving Boba Fett a personality.
Yeah, I think there's lots of nods to Star Wars Extended Universe, bits and pieces. The character introduced at the end as a sort of, well, yeah, as a villain, there's a...
Oh, Cad Bane.
Yeah, who's a sort of gunslinger.
All-purpose villain name, isn't it? He's a bit of a cad. And also Bane.
That is a very villain name, yeah. He's from the sort of Star Wars Extended Universe. I meant to look up exactly where he's from, and I didn't.
I think my partner Googled him after we watched the last episode. I think he might be from Clone Wars, the TV show.
Yeah, that would make sense. Yeah, so there's a lot of continuity. There's a lot of, dare I say, like, fan service. But, I mean, you could argue that giving Boba Fett his own TV show is like a giant, like, dollop of fan service. But...
I mean, if they're going to bring in a villain who allegedly has some sort of personal connection to Boba Fett, I don't understand why he wasn't in it earlier. You know, he only turns up at the end of the penultimate episode. This is like the Kingpin in Hawkeye all over again, guys. If he's going to be this important to the ending, bring him in earlier.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Considering you spend, like, a lot of time flashing back to Boba Fett's past, but not this kind of crucial bit of it.
Exactly, where the fuck's Cad Bane?
Yeah, that was a sort of bizarre series of things. Like, they could even have had him, like, wiping out the Sand people, but rather than some motorcycle speeder bike gang who don't reappear.
Well, that wouldn't have made it some sort of weird fake out. I don't know.
I mean, we probably shouldn't review the show they didn't make, right?
Yeah. But yeah, aside from the Boba Fett episodes, and it really is almost entirely separate, there's also a 2-part Mandalorian special.
Yeah.
In which the Mandalorian does his usual Mandalorian things of being slightly awkward about his armour and his weapons, and having light comedy moments, and having emotional moments with Baby Yoda.
Yeah.
And it works fine. It's pretty good. It's nice to see him again. The character has a lot more charm, even though he literally never takes his helmet off, basically.
Yeah, no, those were good, actually. I mean, that's the bit when I felt the show really picked up, when they basically started bringing in the stuff. I think this show is basically become sort of Mandalorian series 2.5 in that it's a sort of side like adventure, and you know the whole show ends, I mean, like, spoilers to the right at the ending here, with Mandalorian and Baby Yoda like flying off clearly for the start of Mandalorian series 3. So if this show basically kind of wants to be a sort of Mandalorian side quest, those were the kind of the best bits of it.
Yeah, I mean, if you were watching The Mandalorian and were thinking, can I be asked to watch a Boba Fett show? Watch the last 3 episodes. There'll be some stuff you don't really hook into in the last one, but there's plenty of Mandalorian and Baby Yoda in it. It'll be fine.
Yeah, and Mark Hamill, digitally de-aged.
Episode 6, I still quite enjoyed it, just because I think the Mandalorian Baby Yoda stuff has been built up well for me to actually care. But the fan service did get a bit. Did we need that much more CGI Mark Hamill and a cameo from Rosario Dawson's Ahsoka? And the return of Timothy Olyphant, although I was glad to see him as well.
Well, at least he did actually wrap up his story.
At least he did something, yeah.
But yeah, there's just continuity for other Star Wars shows they're developing, such as the Rosario Dawson spin-off show and things like that. But I did like, again, the sort of the nods to previous Star Wars films, whereas like Yoda trained Luke in a swamp, and now Luke is training Baby Yoda in a swamp, and he's the master, and Baby Yoda is the petulant child. So, there was a nice sort of symmetrical inversioning there, which, was obviously good for the fans, but obviously like an interesting fan nod does not make a great show.
But yeah, Baby Yoda is still quite cute, and they've actually done a good job of building up that relationship between the Mandalorian and Baby Yoda to the extent that this stuff is more or less interesting by itself. Certainly, the fact that relationship still works and holds your attention is a reminder that there's nothing like that in the Boba Fett sections of a storyline. I didn't feel that much investment in the bond between Boba Fett and Fennec Shand or whoever.
Well, it's a shame because Fennec Shand just kind of stands around next to Boba Fett, in lieu of actually having a relationship with him.
It's a shame, as Ming-Na Wen is very good at playing the sort of badass with a heart in S.H.I.E.L.D., and she could have done more with this part, but she was sadly a bit wasted in this. Never mind.
Yeah, no, I thought she was very good. She was definitely my standout performance from the show in that she was consistently in all the episodes and was good. So I don't know if they plan to do any more Boba Fett stuff. It's not been announced as a sort of, a mini-series or limited series. I believe it's announced as a sort of open-ended property, but we'll see what becomes of that. But I hope that they find some way to continue her character.
Oh, and who knows? If they decide not to do any more Boba Fett, they'll probably just roll it all back into the Mandalorian or something. I mean, the finale's fine. The flurry of action is enough to keep the momentum going, even if you're not that bothered about the Boba Fett stuff.
They have a kind of cool, like, Western style, like, shootout in a small town. Again, going back to the sort of sci-fi Western angle, which is quite good. There's a lot of spectacular action. They do weave all the plot lines together at the end and link everything up that they kind of set up in this show. There's some good bits when the characters come together, like, seeing Chrysanthemum fight a load of Trandoshans was kind of cool, and I quite liked how there's this group of cyberpunk bikers Boba Fett enlists at one point. They have speed bikes, but they're kind of done up like mod Vespers from the 70s with kind of lots of wing mirrors and bright colours, and they've got this sort of punk aesthetic and body modification thing going on. That was a kind of a cool little thing they threw in there, which, to be honest, they could have made more of.
Yeah, I quite enjoyed some of the random elements. There was a tiny bit where one of the little cyberpunk people did a weird little spin before he shot his gun, which some people online seem to think is the worst thing ever done in Star Wars, which, if only that were the worst thing ever done in Star Wars.
Now, that honestly passed me by. I mean,
it's quite funny, but the level of upset seems disproportionate.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen people talking about fans complaining about this, saying that, like, what they don't like about it is that, like, Boba Fett's not badass enough and he doesn't kill enough people. And a lot of people are saying, like, well, it's Disney, mate, isn't it? What are you expecting? Like a bloodbath? It's not Quentin Tarantino's Boba Fett. And I don't know if it is the Disneyfication of the show. I don't know if it is also the fact that if he's going to be the main character...
I don't think we're ever going to get the Star Wars equivalent of the Punisher, lads. It's just not a 18-rated franchise. It's a cute baby Yoda. That's always been the Star Wars way.
I guess so, yeah. Yeah, so I don't know if it is all the blame should rest with Disney and this, if it is a Disneyfication of it. Also, is the fact that, like, you want your main character to be relatable, and just shooting people in cold blood is not particularly relatable unless you, again, like, really love the Punisher or whatever.
Although, talking about Boba Fett killing people does bring me into my main complaints about the finale. Well, my complaints about one scene of the finale in which Boba Fett confronts Cad Bane, the villainous Cad Bane, and they have a really awful conversation where they trade blows whilst delivering ponderous dialogue about Boba Fett's true nature, which feels incredibly unearned and portentous. All this stuff about, you're a killer, you'll always be a killer. Were we pretending he wasn't? What are you talking about? This feels like it's a conversation that's meant to wrap up the themes of the show, except they've never set up any of this. It felt like they were either referencing events in a different piece of media I haven't seen, and if this does wrap up a plot in Clone Wars, then okay. Or they were just trying to make up for the fact that none of this stuff had been done in the show by just trying to do it in a big blob at the end. Anyway, yeah, that scene really annoyed me.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a symptom of the complete lack of character development or poor way they've handled the kind of themes of the show. I mean, like, again, it was supposed to, I guess, wrap things up, but it ended up just being sort of a bit awkward.
Yes, I mean, that was the only scene in the finale that particularly bothered me, so, and it didn't last that long, so whatever, fair enough. The rest of it was just fun, lightweight fighting. I enjoyed when the big monster smashed the things up.
Yeah, I mean, like, the finale was one of the best bits because it had, like, yeah, rather than this kind of bizarre scattergun approach to storytelling, it kind of actually brought everything together into a big fight scene, which is, I guess, what you want from your blockbuster entertainment. Even if it's like TV blockbuster, I suppose.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you can't write an interesting character study of Boba Fett, you can at least have a clear goodie and a clear baddie, or a clear team of goodies and baddies, and smash them into each other until the episode ends. In a vaguely well-choreographed way, which they did manage to do.
Yeah, so I did like that. Yeah, it's a shame about the stuff that kind of led up to that.
Yeah, I mean, the final 3 episodes were entertaining enough. I don't feel too pissy about having watched it, but it failed so completely on selling me on the notion of a Boba Fett show, but it doesn't feel like a great outcome.
Yeah, I watched the first couple of episodes with my partner and she kind of completely lost interest in it, and then came back when I was watching it and she was in the room and Baby Yoda returned, and then she stuck with it from Baby Yoda's return to the end because that's the entertaining part.
That's what the people want.
Baby Yoda.
Very much.
Give the people what they want.
Okay, and lastly today, we are talking about Don't Look Up, a dark comedy drama on Netflix, written and produced and directed by Adam McKay and starring a comically large and comically famous ensemble cast including Jennifer Lawrence, Leonardo DiCaprio, Jonah Hill, Meryl Streep, Cate Blanchett, Ron Perlman, Timothée Chalamet, many more besides. And yes, this is, of course, a film about two scientists who discover that a comet is going to crash into the Earth and wipe out the population. And they attempt to warn the world about this, and rather than the blind terror they were kind of expecting, it becomes a weird polarised political talking point. Exactly what to do about it and how to react to it become increasingly frivolous and divisive, and yes, it's all one big allegory for climate change, and it's all quite depressing. We have seen this film. Alistair, how did you find it?
This film is not subtle. It has a message and it's loud and clear about it. And I feel that you can criticise this film for being unsubtle, but that is kind of missing the point in that it's all about just basically shouting its message as loud as possible, as simply as possible. I mean, it's trying deliberately to be unsubtle, which is its very nature. I mean, I did feel that it had a main flaw. Its main flaw is that the characterization's a bit weak. Like Adam McKay's previous kind of satirical, sort of dark humoured works like The Big Short worked much better because they had much better characterization. But I kind of feel that the main way to evaluate this film is how effectively does it communicate its very simple message.
I don't know, I feel like I could judge it a little on the fact that it's both repetitive and unfunny.
Well, this is not a great opening for a review. We said it's got poor characterization, it's unsubtle, it's repetitive, and it's unfunny. I mean, it's only going to get better.
I see your point about the unsubtlety. I see your point about the fact it is clearly trying to make its one point again and again, and although it is repetitive, yes, as you say, clearly it's resigned itself to that mission. Do kind of wish it had better jokes, though. The satire, yes, it's repetitive and it's point hammering, but I just feel like it just doesn't have quite enough teeth to actually be genuinely funny by itself. I feel like if anything it would always make the point better if I wasn't slightly bored by how samely the points are being made. Maybe it doesn't help that I just watched Veep, which does a lot of this same satire about how useless and self-interested and venal politicians are, a lot better and a lot more stylishly and a lot more savagely and funnily. But yeah, I felt like this is a level of satire which is done much better in both, well, various things like Veep and many, many episodes of Black Mirror. Black Mirror also tends to have better, characterization. There have been, some episodes of Black Mirror are obvious and point hammering in a similar way. The better episodes of Black Mirror do actually have good characters as well, and they do actually really work emotionally. And this works emotionally in a few places. The characters basically land fine, but they're not that memorable. The final scene was good, I'll give them that. They actually made it work in the final scene. There was a really nice, understated sadness in the final scene, which I thought really, really worked, which is a relief considering the whole film was building up to it. The final scene where they're sitting down and having dinner, I thought was really, really good and really, really sad. If only the rest of the film had that level of emotion or better jokes. Yeah,
I mean, in terms of a work of satire, it's not really breaking any new ground. I mean, they've got there's Mark Rylance plays this sort of slightly away with the fairies sort of tech billionaire who's basically more interested in making money than saving the world and would happily kill the whole world just so that he could kind of make some money off selling the ashes. And, all the politicians are kind of venal, self-involved, don't really care, happily exploit the kind of the apathy or anger or fear of the public for their own ends. I mean, it's it isn't really breaking any new ground here. Like you say, if it was funnier or was a bit more interesting in terms of the satire, then that would work better, or if the characters were more well developed. And like I say, you don't have to look far with Adam McKay's stuff to find better developed characters. The Big Short is a really character driven film, even though it makes lots of quite complex points about finance and what led up to the 2008 financial crash. But it kind of weaves that through stories about characters kind of growing and developing, whereas the characters were a bit sort of boilerplate.
I mean, I guess the characters have their sort of journey, and you can sort of see where it's going quite quickly. Like, as soon as you have the first scene where they try to tell someone about the oncoming disaster and they don't care, or they immediately start looking at the self-interested angle, it happens at the start, it happens in the middle, and then it happens at the end. There's a few nice little satirical bits, like the revelation of what the title Don't Look Up actually refers to is kind of a nice little idea. And yeah, I don't know, Timothée Chalamet playing a crusty little shit instead of a, like, withery, posh, artistical young man was quite funny, I'll give him that.
Yeah, or the sort of messiah.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, he was good. I mean, the cast is very strong. It's one of the things to really like about this film. And I think everyone's like giving it their all with the characters that they've got. Like Jennifer Lawrence, she's very good at this sort of, how angry she is about how the world isn't listening to her. I guess, is she supposed to be the Greta Thunberg sort of character or analog? She's really angry that no one cares about the end of the world and doesn't understand why people, are motivated to do something. Meryl Streep is clearly enjoying playing a sort of politician that seems to have all like the worst parts of Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton thrown together, and sort of really enjoys just being a real shit. Yeah, I could carry on, but the cast is great.
Yeah, no, Meryl Streep's clearly having fun, and yeah, there's some interesting satire in how Jennifer Lawrence's character is treated compared to Leonardo DiCaprio's character, who obviously gets taken a lot more seriously for some unspecified reason we may never truly know. The ideas are in there, they just get a bit whipped over the course of this film's inexplicable 2.25 hour running time. Why this isn't at least half an hour shorter, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, crucially, if this was an episode of Black Mirror, it would have been shorter. You could probably do this in a quite tight hour.
Yes, or at the very least a quite tight hour and a half. Come on, guys, try harder.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, if the film persuades a few sceptical people to start really caring about climate change, then that is more important on a global scale than whether amateur reviewer and podcaster Nick Bryan likes it. But I did not particularly like it.
But here's the thing about the message about climate change, which is that I do respect them for making a film that's like so straight up. And, Leonardo DiCaprio has been using his celebrity platform for quite a long time to talk about climate change. Not even, it's risen up the political agenda in the last 5 years, but for a long time he's been banging this drum. And so give him some credit there. And I do respect the fact they made this film with this like really strong message. And it's like trying to be really, really simple so everyone gets it. Like, we have to do something or we're all going to die. Or at least huge numbers of people will die. But I do feel that there's some miscommunication in here. One of the crucial things is that because in this film it's a comet that's coming to destroy the world, not the slow gnawing away at the natural ecostructure of the world through climate change, is that the thing is the comet is a simple thing to deal with. And they come up with a plan at one point which is basically they're going to launch like 100 nukes at it to just blast it to bits. There's a reason in the film why that doesn't happen, but the thing is there's a quite simple solution to dealing with the comet, whereas although climate change is like as big an existential threat, the solution is much more complicated. And there is this thing, I don't know if the film is trying to make a meta point about the environmental movement, but a message of just be frightened doesn't actually help people change the world. Like, a message of be scared works if you're going to be hit by a train. Because if you shout at someone like, look, there's a train, you need to be frightened, it makes people react because there's a clear, simple thing to do next, which is jump out of the way of the train. Or in this case, the comet, like fire all the weapons you have at it to destroy it. And that's simple. Now, when you enter something like climate change, which is not simple, shouting at people, be frightened, doesn't actually lead them to engage with the complexities that you need to address the climate catastrophe. Instead, it makes people either just randomly angry or kind of apathetic and depressed with the whole sort of, I guess we're all going to die. And I do feel the film is trying to make a good point, but in some ways it kind of falls into a trap that a lot of environmental campaigning makes, which is like shouting at people, be frightened, doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a better idea, but yeah, I mean, you're right. If you come out of this film feeling fired up about climate change and angry about the fact that not much is being done about it, is it going to motivate you to go and start arguing on the internet? Is that the outcome?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. It doesn't produce like a sort of a swift response. And, I think that there are if you wanted to make a film like that motivates people to address the climate crisis, I would say make something that shows the better world that could exist after we solve the climate crisis. Like Star Trek is like really good at this, which is basically like in the future, the world could be better and like we could live in harmony with each other. And, it's not like Star Trek's not boring, it's got exciting things in it and it's fun and interesting. and like showing people the carrot is like much better than the stick, and this film is like it's just like stick from like start to finish.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the crutch of the metaphor they've ended up in. There's not much they can really go beyond that with this comet, unless they somehow thought of another more... I mean, I guess ultimately the fact that people are choosing not to do it, to deal with it, due to the mechanic they use in the middle to explain why they don't just blow it up, is meant to be the thing that locks it into a firmer metaphor for climate change. People could be doing something about it, but they're choosing not to for money. There's an idea in there somewhere, but again, I don't know what precedent for direct action that sets.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the more interesting parts of the film. Yeah, when they introduced, was it Mark Rylance playing a sort of combination of, what's it like, Peter Thiel, Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs kind of rolled into one. This sort of greedy billionaire who wants to make money from the comet, but also sells his desire to profit directly from the comet as like something that's actually going to be beneficial for humanity.
Yeah, but they don't really, I don't know, get into that in a lot of detail. They tend to go back to this quite repetitive beat of the two main characters in different ways calling for action and people ignoring them or laughing at them.
I think if you agree with the film's message, or if you agree that basically the tech billionaires would rather destroy the world than save it if they can profit from it, then I guess you'll agree with it. But that's not, I guess, the audience the film's trying to change the mind of. And if you're more on the fence, you might think that this is just a kind of fairly thin caricature of just like a greedy businessman. Like he's a bit like Mr. Burns, but if he was like a tech billionaire. I don't know if that's how much that's going to change people's minds. But then I don't know how you would change someone's mind with a satirical billionaire character.
I mean, I broadly agreed with that satirical billionaire characterization, and even I didn't like it that much.
Yeah.
So yeah, just didn't do much for me. I gather it's been nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars. Hope it doesn't win.
Yeah, it was bizarre. I don't know if it's just residual love for Leonardo DiCaprio, if it's basically Oscar people feeling this is how they can do something about the climate emergency by voting for this film. They announced this week the 10 Best Picture nominees, bumper year, 10 Best Picture nominees. I've seen 5 of the 10, and I will try to watch all 10 before it comes out. And this is definitely my least favourite of the 5 that I've seen.
I have seen 3 of the 10. The ones we covered on this podcast, obviously. Don't Look Up, Dune and Licorice Pizza. Of those 3, personally, I'd probably give it to Dune, but since the people who are making the decision are not nerds, they may well prefer Licorice Pizza.
I prefer Dune, absolutely. I love that film. I think The Power of the Dog might clinch it, but, it's early days yet.
The few bits of analysis I've read have said they think that Power of the Dog might end up sweeping it in a lot of categories.
I mean, we could review that film at some point. It's interesting. It's quite divisive.
What's that? It's on Netflix and I don't have to pay?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm newly convinced.
Well, yeah, we should save the Power of the Dog banter for when Nick has seen it. It's interesting. I'd recommend seeing it. I'm surprised that this film has ended up in the mix, but I don't think it will win. But, there's obviously the MFV curse that now we've said that it's probably going to win loads.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think the problem with this film is that the sheer simplicity and repetition of the message means there's just not that much to say about it.
No, there isn't a lot. I mean, there is like some smaller things going on, like, how the Leonardo DiCaprio character kind of gets kind of trapped by becoming a celebrity, that the kind of his love of being a celebrity eclipses his mission, and he feels he's doing his mission, but actually he's just self-serving his own ego as a sort of newly minted celebrity. Or, there's some other kind of interesting bits about how the people who want to do something about the comet are constantly, they tell everyone, spend all their time telling people to do something rather than actually doing something. Like they hold a huge concert to tell people to look up and see the comet, but rather than actually doing anything about it.
Yeah. God, that comedy song was interminable. I did not enjoy that.
I don't know if it's supposed to be deliberately bad.
I hope so.
I think that's sort of taking a shot at, I don't know, I guess people a bit like Leonardo DiCaprio who are kind of, they think they're using their celebrity to make the world a better place by addressing one of, if not the biggest issues in the world. But actually they're just kind of self-serving, congratulating, backslapping a bit, and also they are spending all their time telling people to do something rather than actually doing anything. But all that's kind of below the surface and sort of very much secondary to scenes of people literally yelling to camera, do something. It happens more than once.
Yeah. I felt the comedy song went on just that bit too long. I mean, the key to getting that sort of thing to work, especially if it's meant to be deliberately bad, is to just, show like a minute or so of it instead of playing out the whole song. Anyway.
Yeah, there's always like any interesting moment is kind of swept away in a tide of unsubtlety. Like I liked how the singer played by Ariana Grande, she's like minting her relationship drama for as much like social media and gossip attention as possible. But as soon as like Leonardo DiCaprio just says to her like, I'm sorry, I had a breakup, she's basically like, get your nose out of my business. I don't know. Again, they're kind of satirizing social media's venal celebrity culture.
Yeah, it's not the most subtle bit of satire in the world, but that bit was quite funny.
Yeah.
And there was also a recurring bit with Jennifer Lawrence being pissy about the general cheating them out of money for snacks at the White House, which they kept bringing up and which did make me laugh when they mentioned it. That was one bit of satire that I thought was quite funny.
Yeah, that was funny.
There we go. I said something nice about the film.
Yeah, so this film does not come recommended.
Yeah, I'll be honest. We're coming to this a smidge late. It's been on Netflix since, November? So, yeah, if you haven't seen it by now, don't bother.
That's all we have time for. If you have enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And whilst you're there, please leave us a review so that other people can find out about the show. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can listen to back issues of the podcast, bonus audio clips, and written pieces by Nick and myself.
And if you want shorter writing by me and Alistair, you can also go to our social media feed on MFV Podcast, or indeed on Facebook, where we are Moderate Fantasy Violence, or to my personal feed, which is NickMB on Twitter, or nickbryan.com on the real internet. And again, the new comics Kickstarter may well be coming soon. Keep those eyes peeled, lads.
I've been Alistair Ball. You can follow me on Twitter, where I'm at AlistairJRBall, or find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. Join us next time for a Netflix double bill, where we will be reviewing Murderville, starring Will Arnett, and The Power of the Dog, starring Benedict Cumberbatch. Until then, have fun. Goodbye.
Bye.
Uncharted, which came out yesterday. Tom Hollander and Marky Mark. Hunt for Treasure. Tom Holland.
How many times? Tom Hollander is the man from
know.
that show about Vickers.
I made it through the whole Spider-Man review without saying Tom Hollander once, and I feel really pleased with myself for that. Okay, I ruined it now in the off-mic bit, but I'd made it through the Spider-Man review, so I'm at least happy about that.